Hi, I'm Catherine Llewellyn, the host of the podcast. You can find out all about Truth and Transcendence on truthandtranscendence.com. And you can find out all about me on beingspace.world, where you will find my online coaching offering as well as my UK-based workshops. The Freedom of Spirit workshop for liberation and empowerment, the Pellower Radical Shift in Consciousness workshop for spiritual expansion, and transformational coaching for exploring the mind-body-spirit connection on the expansive path. You can also support the podcast by actually making a donation. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. So today I'm delighted to welcome special guest Graham Skidmore, who's here to talk about a number of things. But the first thing we're going to talk about is, what am I missing? And I wonder if anyone listening to this can resonate to that as a kind of theme. What am I missing? Graham spent the first 40 years of his life enjoying the status quo, followed by being on the unforgiving side of broken systems, which led to a spiritual awakening and 7 years of self-discovery to heal and understand his roles and responsibilities during Earth's changes. Now, that's easy enough to say, but as you can hear from that, there are so many questions within that little paragraph. So I'm going to be asking Graham about all of that as we go. So you can find Graham on engensolutions.com. That's ENGENSOLUTIONS.com. So Graham, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Graham. That was a very beautiful introduction. That was very well said.
Thank you. Well, it was your words.
Well, I guess, yeah. All right. Well, good job. Whoever helped me write those.
This is one of the reasons we have other people, isn't it, in our lives? Because sometimes...
Oh, absolutely, it takes a village.
Yeah, exactly. As you say in one of your videos that you recently put out on YouTube. So would you like to kick off, Graham, by talking about this idea of what am I missing? And why is that such an interesting question for you? And can you remember when you first started asking that question?
Gosh, I think that probably my last 2 years of my corporate life, my traditional, so just to kind of back up to build the bridge there. Yeah. So I literally, my whole life, I understood myself and enjoyed the privilege of having a world built around me being white, male, executive, corporate world, successful, checking the boxes, playing the game the way that I was told I was supposed to play the game. And in the last 2 years, I got to a spot where I started to feel like this is really messed up. The more I achieve, the worse I'm feeling. And at this point in time, I'm approaching 40, and I'm like, wait a second here. If I'm at the height of my quote unquote career, but I'm at the lowest of my feeling, this isn't good. There's something that's got to be missing here. There's something that this can't be right. And I look around, and I'm seeing these other people that I work with, and the one thing that stuck out to me was that there were many people that didn't seem to get as rattled by whatever happened in their professional life and how it affected them as a person or their identity, their mood, et cetera, as it did with me. Right? And so that was like the first kind of pattern that I noticed that was different between myself and others. And in talking with some of them, many of them had some sort of a religious or belief system that they anchored into, where I did not at that. I never even, I never even had thought really much about religion or spirituality or anything like that up to that point in time. I didn't have a curious mind like that, right? It was, my curious mind was all dedicated towards work, making money, acquiring stuff, doing my part for the consumption capitalist model. And that was when, Spirit first started to nudge me to let me know, hey, it's time to move on to your next chapter. And in, I like to learn the hard way. I like to, learn with the 2x4 across the head, as I say, but, they stick with me, but they're challenging lessons. And so it took me about 2 years before I finally made the switch. And even then that required some nudging, inside the corporate world for me to leave and to go on to my next chapter. And so that then really started with okay, I'm in this place I never thought I would be. And what now? And again, at that point in time, I was just exploring this concept. And at that point in time, I was exploring the concept maybe of religion versus belief system. Right. I was a little more pigeonholed. And that led down a lot of very interesting rabbit holes and conversations. And somebody from my past at Quicken Loans is where I work now, called Rocket Mortgage. And somebody from my past there that used to work with me reached back out to me and put some bugs in my ear, like, hey, you know that you're actually like spiritually gifted, but you know that you're actually like psychic, you know that you're like a medium, right? And I was kind of like, what are you talking about? Right. And then of course even then that I took that as I thought about all of the abilities versus the learnings, right? And so I'll pause there and just say, yeah, so that, but I definitely needed a lot of nudges along the way. It was definitely not things that necessarily were intuitive to me, aside from this isn't right. And I definitely needed to hit a variety of bottoms in order to bounce up.
Yeah. Great. So at the very least, you actually paid attention to what your heart and your body were telling you in terms of not being happy, not feeling good for you.
Yeah, well, it wasn't difficult. I got to a spot where I was struggling because I had so much fear and anxiety. And again, in hindsight, recognizing how that affected the psyche. And I went down the path of understanding myself through the lens of neurodivergency. Right. And so as I started to understand these things, the more I kind of became those things, which wasn't necessarily, it had its benefits, but it also had its challenges, which I no longer identify with those labels because of the challenges. But I started to find myself, bumping into things. My spatial awareness became much more challenging. My ability to put sentences together became much more challenging. I was very angry. I was very unhappy, and fortunately I still had at least enough of my wits about me to say, this is crazy. I didn't just become inept overnight. So what the heck's going on here? And that sort of, and that was that was a big trigger, but yeah, I definitely still needed to hit a few more bottoms than that maybe would have liked, but that was what I needed.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. And when you look back at that time of becoming inept and noticing that you were inept, um, you know, um, now when you look back at that, what sense do you make of that? How do you perceive that now from where you are now?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. It leads down such a wonderful topic. And so this is a big thing where one of the things I talk about a lot is the conflict and the challenges arising between like the man-made intelligent design and the Earth's intelligent design. And so a lot of, as I was going through that, a lot of the lenses that I was using was the man-made intelligent design, which says you only encounter adversity if you're making mistakes or if you're doing something wrong, right? And then looking at things and having regrets, saying, "Oh, I wish I had learned this earlier, so I could have avoided this." Right. So that was how that journey started. Which then, as I progressed and matured and evolved through my journey, I came to recognize and value and appreciate all of those experiences because I realized that I had to go through those so that I could relate to others, so that I could build bridges through firsthand experience of others that were in these same places and looking for some new answers. Right. And so I recognize that my life played out the exact way that it was supposed to, the way that it needed to, so that I could learn what I needed to learn in the first part of life to do what I needed to do in the second part of life, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. So in other words, it was like a necessary lesson for you
Absolutely.
to move to the next stage.
Yeah. So now I was able
I
to.
bet that wasn't obvious at the time.
Oh no, absolutely. Back then it was how could I avoid these challenges and pain? Where now I have gratitude for that, and I don't look at it as pain, right? I look at it as learning, and I look at it as what was needed as part of my, Earth as a school.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This thing of, right, I used to be competent, and now suddenly I'm not. That feeling, and I've had that experience, and I've spoken to a couple of people recently who've had that similar experience where they've said, "I feel hopeless. I'm failing at everything at the moment. I wish I could go back to being the capable person I was before." But you can't go back, can you? You can only go forward to being a different capable person. So would you like to say something about that?
That is a very, like, once you get to that's such a true statement. One of those, and you see some people talk about, it definitely doesn't get talked about enough in the quote unquote spiritual awakening, kind of topics and spaces. Once you let that genie out of the bottle, There's really no going back. Once you start to see and recognize and understand the world through a different lens, you know, you don't go back because everything around you is geared towards pushing you along that path. And so when we don't go with that flow, that's when pain occurs, trauma occurs, frustration, anger, right? That's when the world and all these events are happening to us as opposed to for us. And so that was kind of the big thing for me was being able to make that transition from, okay, right. And if you think, like, I had to still, lean into my logic and look for the synchronicities to reinforce that. All right, keep taking the steps forward. And as I take the steps forward, how am I really feeling? Is it relieving stress? Even though things may not necessarily be becoming more clear to me, am I feeling more at ease? Right. And the answers were yes. Right. And are things starting to fall in place, even though they may not be the way I wanted them to be or thought they would turn out? Are they starting, like the game of Tetris, the blocks starting to build upon each other and the logic? And then every time it was logic, the answers were yes. All of these synchronicities are stating that your life is getting better. Doesn't necessarily, and that was challenging because it wasn't necessarily more clear, but it was better. And so operating on that faith was definitely a new skill set that I had to learn and develop because, to your point, there was no going back. And the more I tried to fight it, the worse that my life became. So I got that message loud and clear.
Brilliant. So how did you, when you say you moved away from the corporate work, what was that transition like, moving out of that work? And then you said you came out of it and you weren't sure what you were going to do next. What was that like at that kind of transition point?
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of hubris involved, because I'd achieved a lot. But then when I left, on one hand, it was on my own terms, and on the other hand, it wasn't on my own terms. Right. A lot of my challenges that I was facing, what do you want to call it? Things just weren't working. I wasn't happy in the workplace. I would be, short with people, frustrated with people, things like that. Anyway, and so they were like, "Hey, things aren't working." I'm like, things aren't working." And so they were like, "Hey, let's move to some other things." And I'm just like, "Nah, I'm out." And I was like a poster child for the organization because I didn't have a college degree in traditional backgrounds, and so it was a lot of look what you can accomplish and achieve. I'm here, and things. And so I expected to retire there and everything else. So based on my accomplishments when I left, I had a lot of hubris. I sell my abilities, what this next chapter would look like, and I'll show them and things of that nature. And then all of a sudden, one of the things that I realized was that I was very blessed in that I built my world around me, right? Meaning, I started areas of the company and then, hired the people in. So people knew me, my quirks, my way of communication, and all of these things that apparently were much more non-traditional and non-common than I realized. And so when I tried to go into the outside world, saying the same things, communicating the same way, instead of people understanding, it was people like, "I don't understand what you're talking about. This doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not getting." And that was, on its own, that's not good. But when you're also trying to introduce new concepts or ways of conducting business and you're not making sense, then it becomes double challenging. And so then I went from the hubris to, a lot of humility and recognizing that there was a lot more to the other world than where I wasn't. And that was when I started to recognize and experience the fear and anxiety of operating in a world that wasn't meant for me and that I couldn't seem to make sense of. I couldn't seem to find underlying logic that was pinning everything together that I could grab onto to get things to make sense to me. And that was very frightening.
Yeah, I bet it was. So what did you do? How did you survive that?
Well, fortunately, I'm very stubborn and I refuse to quit. And I certainly, so I did a lot of the traditional things, right? I asked people for assistance that seemed like that knew how to navigate that world. And after probably, about a year-ish, maybe 2 years of like beating my head against the wall, trying to take my life in the direction it wasn't meant to be, my friend Sunshine, I think, I started to internalize her guidance to me more of, hey, maybe that's not the route of life you're supposed to be going. Maybe that's not what your next chapter is supposed to be. And well, one of the things that she had said to me was, some suggestion was maybe you should do like a mushroom journey. And at that time in my life, I definitely, frankly, booze was my thing to I didn't know myself as spiritually gifted or psychics or anything. So I numbed my senses through booze, but I didn't do anything else. And so I was always cautious about stuff. And so it took me and all I knew when she told me that was there's a big responsibility on the other side of that door. I didn't know what it was. And I just knew that I not to do it until I was ready to accept it. So it took me about 6 months between that and then going through and then opening up that door. And when I did that and stepped into, understanding myself as more of, I'll just call it a being of consciousness in a human suit here, here on earth, as opposed to this human suit being my identity, kind of a one and done thing, things started to become much more clear to me. And that was when I then switched from trying to remake myself in a new corporate image into recognizing the need to remake myself as burst.
Yeah.
And so I started going down the path of shadow work and a lot of understanding and healing, pain, trauma, a lot of anger to get through to understand myself through a new lens and the world as a new lens.
Beautiful. Well done. I mean, that's quite a path. That's quite a journey that you went through in your early 40s, so in a way, you're still a young man at that time.
I like to think so,
You know what I mean? It's like, fantastic. It sounds like Sunshine is a keeper. So
she has been an absolute, that's why I make sure to mention her so that, because I know over the years, I probably am giving her the reinforcement or credit that she deserves for all of her positive contributions. And so this is a way of doing that. Yeah, she has been a godsend, literally.
fantastic. Well, you, again, fortunate to have someone like that, and also fortunate that you had the sense to listen, because that's the other thing. Often we just don't listen. And years later, we think, oh my God, if only I'd listened to that person, I could have saved myself 8 years of pain and drama. So you did that. So now you have got this, all this interesting stuff that you're doing now, which I'm not going to try to explain what it is, because you're formulating it and it's coming through, I believe, as you're working on it, and you have stuff that's formed and stuff that's coming through. And I did watch some of your new video series, which I do recommend people go and tune into that. Actually, the episodes are not very long, and each one has like a nugget of something very important in it. And they have a kind of progression to them. So it's worth checking those out. And in fact, I think I'll put the link for those in the show notes, if that's all right with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't come with an owner's manual video series.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Which I think we all know that we didn't come with an owner's manual. But I'll just tell you a little joke that my friend and I used to play. We'd be in the pub and we'd do this little comedy skit with each other. And the comedy skit is you're in heaven or the afterlife, and God or whoever it is briefing you on what's going to happen when you're born and what you're going to learn and all the experiences you're going to have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're fantastic. This is fantastic information. This is all just before you're born. He says one final thing before you're born. When you're born, you're going to forget everything I just told you. Bye. And then you're born.
That's about it. Yeah, that's pretty. Yep, that's pretty in line with what I teach.
And we would laugh. We thought this was so hilarious. Anyway, would you want to pick up on that and take that a bit further?
Yeah, my partner Jamie, I have to give her credit. The title of "I Didn't Come with an Owner's Manual" came from her, and and so what I understood that part of my responsibility here is as birth goes through this next evolution and is sharing information as a being of consciousness for those that want to have it and to hear about it. And so it was being able to touch on the concept of what does it mean to understand life as a being of consciousness going through Earth as a school, and how do the various pieces fit together and support each other, and then where are there conflicts? So I talk about the roles of, for example, the roles of psychics. And unfortunately, in many cases, concepts like psychism or mediumship have been distilled down to something like fortune telling, as opposed to understanding them as your ways of accessing information through having personal empowerment to access information to guide you through your own journey so that you're not beholden to any hierarchical systems, right? And so recognizing that we're surrounded by information all around us, and when we don't understand that we're tapping into information via the energies, well, then that can feel like system overload or information overload or sensory overload, right? As an example, as well as, like there is a curriculum. There are different things that we're all here to learn. And the other important thing that I share that's really critical is that we're not all here to learn the same thing, nor are we all here to learn the same way. And so when you start to recognize that there are, I don't know what the math, many, many, many different realities all occurring at one time, it starts to also explain why there's a lot of confusion, why it can be challenging to see eye to eye with people or get somebody to understand your point of view on something, right? We're coming from different base operating systems, for lack of a better description, right? Like the way that we operate and see the world. And I use the term reality versus perspectives because I think perspectives tends to imply that there's this one record of truth and it's, okay, that's just your version of the truth. And I'm just going to be nice and appease you by saying, okay, that's your perspective, versus acknowledging that your reality is much more validating that, hey, we're having two different experiences. And that can be as simple as the same way that men and women will experience the same things differently. Somebody who's 20 versus somebody who's 60 is going to experience the same set of things differently. Both of their realities are valid. It's not a perception. It's their own individual reality. And so this one size fits all approach that exists within the man-made intelligent design, whether it be through healthcare, education, expectations, creates a whole lot of problems and making people feel that they're broken when the reality is it's the systems that are broken. So that's one of the big themes as well, that you're not broken, the systems are, that I want to come through to people too.
Very powerful. Yeah, absolutely right. I like that distinction between perception and reality in the sense that my reality is my reality and your reality is your reality, as opposed to just different perceptions of the real reality. I like the way you described that, because that's, even though I find that idea quite a comfortable idea to receive, it's still quite a shocking idea because it's so different from even some of the strong philosophical and spiritual ways of speaking. To say your reality is your reality, not just your perception of reality. So I really like that. I think that's very, very strong. And I wanted to pick up on the thing you said about information that's available to us, and mentioning psychics and mediums and all that sort of thing. And you mentioned something about information overwhelm. So I just wanted to pick up on that. What was the connection between the fact there's all this information available and the information overwhelm that you mentioned?
Yeah, I'll share. So this is where, through the lens of, when I was understanding myself through the lens of neurodiversity, right? One of the symptoms, and then just for everybody listening, because when I use the term neurodiversity because it's more broad than just one thing, but for context, as I was going through understanding of myself, I was, diagnosed as, let's see here, there's alexithymia, math dyslexia, regular dyslexia, autistic, Erland syndrome, which is these glasses. I think there was like one more. Either way, after like a handful, I was like, all right, I'm cool. I don't really need any more. ADHD, that was the other one, right? Yeah. Right. And so one of them was those is sensory overload or what kind of the, and so, and I would always feel that. I would always feel jittery. I'd always feel like I couldn't take anything else going on into my head, and I was always on edge. And so over time, I started to recognize that, I'm picking up on the energies of other people. I'm picking up on the energies of my circumstances. I'm picking up on the energies of animals. The world is talking to me. And so when I didn't understand how to take in that information, it would be like, it just builds up on it, right? Until the body's able to figure out how to process it. And it's either going to process it one of two ways. It's either going to explode and throw it out through like a temper tantrum or something like that, right? Which I'm not too proud to admit that those were ways that I would do it, right? And going and blowing off steam would be, without knowing that was what I would do. And that would, usually involve something that, like, where I needed to receive like some sort of a rush, adrenaline, to then let that stuff off. And instead, once I started to recognize how things were talking to me, and then I was able to process things. And so I didn't have that sense of overload anymore. I didn't have that need to blow up. I didn't have that buildup occurring on me. And instead I started to um, spend my time going, okay, what am I supposed to be learning? What is being taught to me? What is being spoken to me? Is what I'm feeling mine? Is it somebody else's? Do I need to, and then also, do I need to take anything on this? Do I need to take any action on this? Which then ultimately led to, okay, I'm extremely open, but do I need to be? And this is another thing that doesn't get taught, which is you have control over your human suit, how much comes in, right? You can train it to only take in information from certain places, but without knowing how and where you're taking in the information, and then you're not able to train it to support you, and it can very much be system overload.
Yeah.
Especially if you choose to work with other people, using your psychism to provide guidance or insights to them and in their life, because then you're connecting into their energy, right? And that, and that, as you talked about, right? Once you start to do those things, it takes a toll. There needs to be a recovery period.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for explaining that. And that makes perfect sense to me. So you were basically, you mentioned in the videos that you've been starting to write your own owner's manual. That sounds like part of that process, that you're kind of starting to realize, hold on, this human suit, as you call it, has the capacity to pick up all this information, but it doesn't mean it has to pick it up, all of it, all of the time. Maybe, and you said you can train yourself to, I suppose, where you're going to focus and what you're going to take in and what you're going to do with the information, which is such a nugget, a gold nugget, that is, that information. If only we were all taught that at school. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Although, where are you going to find to teach people that at school? I mean, that's the other question. Is that part of what you are now teaching people in this work you're now doing?
Yes, as a matter of fact, going back to Sunshine, she helped me to understand that, as well as another friend, Ruby. Right now, we use the term, it's like a radio station, right? You can turn it, you get static, and sometimes, and then other times, it comes in very clearly. And so it's learning to do that same thing with your body. So yeah, that's part of what we teach. Now, she's been doing it much longer than I have, and that's much more of what part of her responsibility teaching people is. So I lean into her. Right. So I kind of get some of the concepts out there, and then I've got my areas of specialties that I'll speak to, but then when there's other people that's the more of their specialization, right, then I'll bring them in, as well. But yeah, through like workshops and things like that, that is definitely, one of the skills that we offer. I want to teach people.
Amazing. So I have to ask, how did you find Sunshine, for example? It sounds like you have other amazing people around. How did you find her and connect with her in the first place?
So she worked for me at Quicken Loans as a project manager, and she couldn't she couldn't handle working with me anymore because I was too stubborn, didn't listen, wouldn't allow her to put in her input, and so she went to another area, in the organization. And so that was our relationship. And, then a year or two later, we both left, kind of corporate at the same time. That we both had our nudges. And then she reached back out to me, which, was surprising because, while we were friendly and everything else, right, I also drove her crazy, right? And it wasn't exactly a great professional relationship in that respect. So, when we reconnected and started to talk on that stuff, the roles had been reversed, right? Where now before I was more for the subject matter expert, and I'm using air quotes for anybody listening who's listening, not seeing. Where then the next time in our next go around, she became more of the subject matter expert, and so it was so I guess that would to make the change, because no matter what, I've always been willing to learn from somebody who I felt like had knowledge that I was interested in. I didn't worry about tiers or hierarchies, so to speak. I was one to listen and learn from anyone. And so I was like, okay, she's got some stuff going on here. And for whatever reason, I keep getting pulled and drawn to that. And so I spent a lot more time then asking her questions to try to understand myself. Because she had grown up always understanding, from a very young age, having spiritual experiences, seeing things differently, where I didn't have any of that. And so she had many more firsthand experience to be able to pull from and to share with me, to help me to understand my curiosities, because I have a lot of questions.
Fantastic. I love it. So let's come forward to the present day. And so what are you now doing, and what are you offering people? How can people work with you or Sunshine or whoever else is in the gang? What's happening now?
It's interesting. It's funny when I first sent information to you and we first started to connect on this. I don't know that I was ready to fully commit to, um, like calling, like I said, my responsibility here as Earth goes through this next evolution. And the way that I would describe it, I'm kind of saying this for the first time, so please bear with me, is I believe in a human-centric future, not an AI-centric future. AI certainly should be a tool the same way that a tool is to a carpenter. But I believe that we are capable of peace through unification by investing in the human, in the individual, that there's more to all of us than we know, that we all have more gifts, wisdom, and abilities than what we've been made aware of. And that's important because when we think about how do we unlock the human potential, well, if we think that this is just what we are and it is as good as it gets, well, then, yeah, you need to lean into something like technology to continue to further the evolution of humanity. But when you recognize that there's much more to the human, well, now all of a sudden it changes the narrative, and we can come together through a shared purpose of investing in ourselves to be better carpenters instead of giving up our agency to the tool itself. And then speaking of tools, right, part of my responsibility is also providing the infrastructure, tools, systems, and products that foster that personal empowerment by helping to both teaching people how to tap into this for themselves, but then also providing the infrastructure for I'll call it a complementary society that's operating, that's human-centric, to be able to be born and to flourish, to lead by example. Because that's the other part of things, that it's not an either or thing, right? And there needs to be a place for the new to emerge. And so that's where Engen Solutions is, the kind of sub-society or complementary society focused on that. Kind of like the same way for those that would watch either an X-Men and they would watch the Xavier School for the Gifted, or Harry Potter and they would go to Hogwarts and it was in a different area, right? Same physical space, same worlds, but kind of different belief systems. And so if I want people to believe that we're here to learn from differences and that we can come together through our differences, well, then I need to be able to demonstrate that. I don't need to yell. I don't need to scream. I don't need to say that your way is not right or my way is better. There's enough people yelling at each other. What we're lacking is demonstration of what's possible. Demonstration that we can come together. Demonstration that that the human potential, unlocking the human potential, exists by investing in humans, not necessarily, just investing in technology. So as part of Engen, I'm focused on, the first thing is health and wellness, right? Understanding ourselves and treating ourselves as beings of consciousness who possess more than the traditional five senses to navigate life is the first step, right? Because if hurt people, then healed people heal people. So we've got to be able to put on our own air mask, before we can help others. Then the next is focusing on training and education as individuals, both understanding our own individual journeys, and whether that be through, status quo in traditional society or, a more non-traditional society, right? The point is about creating choices for people and letting each person make the choice, but doing it because it's their choice and they're as educated as possible and supported in that choice. Then once you have people that are healed, educated, now we get into the economic opportunities, and we're focused then on employment opportunities and self-employment or income generation, right? And so that's providing certain things to like the barter marketplace and the campus credits program, which is helping people to work together and sharing their gifts as the economy evolves and changes with the influence of AI. That's going to affect efficiencies, as well as the spiritual community needs some of its own infrastructure to come together as a collective, right? We have a lot of experts, we have a lot of people, but what we lack is the infrastructure kind of bringing us all together to create that stability and growth. And then finally, many of us feel drawn, kind of come wired for our own sort of passion projects or social injustices that we want to tackle. And so then that's kind of the last leg of the stool that I'm focused on.
Great. That's good. So the people doing that are going to be people who've got quite a strong foundation beneath them before they start doing that, rather than just when they're, you know, too young and too stupid to actually do anyone any good.
So I would invite, so it'd be like people like yourself, right? I would invite you to be a part of these networks, to be part of these teachers, right? It's going to take a village, right? It's not just about what I have to share. That's for sure.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds really exciting. So, if somebody did decide to get in touch after listening to this episode, for example, what would they discover was available to them initially when they first get in touch?
So, if they were to go to, we are looking for the first 100 members at Engen, and it is a membership-based club, and that's just so that we have that, because that provides us the legal infrastructure to kind of have some of our own sets of rules. And our own sets of rules are things that create a level playing field and equality. So starting out, what they would have access to is a technology tool or my AI tool called Janus, which has got the dual meaning. One, which is the Egyptian goddess of the new emerging, as well as the acronym of just another neurodivergent uplifting society. And I like to I think it's fun for me to make acronyms out of things. And so, and then what that is focused on is it provides a lot of knowledge and a framework for self-discovery and healing that I call the ACE modules. They stands for access, choices, and exposure, and helping people to facilitate those in their life. Because to me, those are the three legs of the stool that are needed for a system of and a society of equality. Is everybody having equal access, equal choices, and equal exposure then leads to equal opportunity. And so it's helping people to get to know themselves, getting themselves to a lot of what we talked about with the owner's manual, as well as the Understand the Science of You podcast. And it helps people to navigate. Here's how to heal yourself. Here's when to work with you. Here's when to work with different practitioners. Here's a different type of practitioners. Here's when, which type of practitioners is right for you to go to. Right. There's and so, it's really about providing that self-guided journey, because we are all here on our own individual journeys. And so it's helping people to figure that out at their own speed. And then providing the support network necessary for when they do say, okay, I need, I'm not able to just figure out this next step on my own. I'm doing it this way. Okay, great. Now we have the various healthcare practitioners, traditional and non-traditional, to assist.
Yeah. So can somebody come along and, because that sounds like that could be quite an all-consuming, absorbing experience for somebody if they do join and commit to it, which if it really works for them, that's great. And if it doesn't really work for them, that's not great. So can people come along and try it out for a month or so? Can people explore and find out if it feels like a good fit for them?
I think that's exactly what it's all about. And that's what Engen stands for, is you figuring out your life and what works for you. And to your point, like there are the practicalities of for most people of needing to balance a job to pay the bills and things like that, and being able to, right. And so it's also about helping people to remove that pressure and give themselves grace in that journey, right? Do what you can, do what works for you. If it feels good, like where you take, you go intense for 90 days and you're like, whoa, I just need to kind of let this set in for a little while, and you take a few months off, so be it, right? That's the whole point of this, is to give people that support, that grace, that love on their own individual journey, so they can help to feel comfortable in their own skin, whatever that means to them.
Beautiful. Well, it sounds amazing. And I think it sounds like for a lot of people, that could be a really interesting thing to explore. And it also sounds from what you're saying as though people who do get involved will have the opportunity later to help form what's happening and be actual agents for the development. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. One of the things that I'm definitely clear about is, the first 100 people, we're also doing is we're leading by example to show that differences can come together, that we learn from differences, of how to work together without losing ourselves in the process. A lot of times in compromise, one side gets watered down. And so instead it's demonstrating how we can have win-win solutions. And so, and there's nothing that's more powerful. If you want to challenge the status quo, sharing a theory is not nearly as powerful as demonstrating it in practice. Right. And so that's what a lot more of this is, is about, is being able to demonstrate that so that people can't say that, oh, that's just true. That's just idealistic. No, it's practical. Here it is being done.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, good for you. Very exciting. And this whole journey you've been on in this last 7, 8, 9 years, however long it is really thrilling and exciting. And also thank you for deciding to come up with something to help other people, because you could have quite easily just said, this is fantastic. I'm now going to, in my own life, carry on learning and growing. Thank you very much. But you actually turned around and said, no, you actually feel like, as you said, in the words I said at the beginning, I think you said, you're understanding your role and responsibilities during Earth's changes. And I think that's very interesting wording. I think that's one that a lot of us are actually exploring and navigating and trying to work out what that means for us. So, and before we started recording, you mentioned to me about that you're sort of fairly near the beginning of bringing this thing through, and
That's correct.
And I said to you, yeah, and actually we need to hear from people who are in that place, as well as hearing from people who've got something really established, because otherwise all we're ever doing is we're never listening to the people who are closer to where we are, if you see what I mean. We need to do that. And we need to understand the experience around it. So I want to really thank you for being open and sharing and communicating all of this with the Truth and Transcendence audience, because I think it's very valuable information and a lot for people to think about, whether they're considering checking out Engen or whether they're looking at, okay, what's my role and responsibility in the changes that are happening? So thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. And to your point earlier, I think I've gone, people, I'm literally 180-degree difference from what I was. And to your point about taking time, I think it's important for transparency to acknowledge that because I did, well in my first part of my life, I was able to take 7 or 8 years, and literally my job was myself. Right. So just from setting a realistic expectation too for people to, if I had to have, done a traditional job and all these other things, I would not have been able to make that progress. Part of my journey was doing the first half so that I could free up the ability for me to do the second half. And so literally, I think anybody would make amazing strides with themselves. It literally, their job was them for, 7 years.
Yeah. Well, that links back to something you said about choosing what success means. What you said it on one of the videos, where you were saying you choose the success which fits with the opportunities that are actually present in your life. So, which I thought was really useful and obvious, really. But do we ever think of that? We often try and think of, well, no, I want this result. Well, that's a massive leap from where you are now. Maybe choose a result that actually is achievable. So that's a really good reminder that you just gave people. So let me just switch around. I've got a couple of questions I want to ask you before we wind up. So other people who are out there in the world trying to be part of the solution in all sorts of different ways, people are trying to do that, whether it's formal and official or whether it's informal or whatever it is. Some of those people listen to this show. Is there something you would like to say to those people who are out there trying to be part of the solution?
Well, first is thank you, right? I mean, it definitely is one who's putting my first few steps out there and exposing my new self publicly. I'm experiencing the nervousness. I'm experiencing the anxiety. I'm experiencing the wonder. And so I want to say thank you to those that have already done that. Thank you to those that are putting themselves out there. Thank you to those that are leading by example. And then the other thing is just not allowing fear to hold you back. I mean, fear and anxiety, nothing good comes from a fear-based perspective. When I see the opposite of the fear would be, instead of, I don't want this to happen, it's, this is what I do want to happen. Right. And so because if you don't know where you want to go, then how does the universe know how to support you? So always focusing on the end game that you're trying to get to then also allows the energies that be to provide you better support, which makes it then obviously much easier to take those steps forward when you see things working out, when you see the synchronicities lining up to support you and giving that positive reinforcement.
Beautiful. Thank you. So next question, which I love to ask the guests, we've talked about a lot today. Has there been a favorite part of our conversation today for you?
Favorite part of our conversation? Interesting. Yes. No, it was when you had asked me about the transition. Actually, a lot of the things about the transition were some of the favorite parts, because I think there's a lot that doesn't get talked about. I think that, like for me, right, I was under the impression that this is just who and what I am, right? However I was born is how I am. And then there's other people then that are, they are comfortable with their identifying as spiritually gifted, psychic mediums, et cetera, things like that, that they were just born that way and that's how they knew themselves. And there's not so much of the here, I knew myself through this lens, and then I came to know myself as a totally different being that's out there to be able to kind of relate to. And so I appreciate the ability to have those conversations and put that, because I can, my shower math from just talking to people is there's probably about 30 to 40% of the population that is much more gifted than they recognize, because they're thinking about it very extreme from like the sci-fi or the comics and thinking about, well, I can't bend spoons, so I'm not psychic. Well, let's back up that bus and think about it a little bit more as intuition to guide you, because those same people that would say, I'm not psychic, well, we'll tell you that you got to trust your gut. Well, what do you call that? Right. And so the more that we can, so the more we can kind of destigmatize the woo-woo and recognize that as part of being human, right? The faster we can evolve as a species.
Quite absolutely right. So final question, would you like to leave the listeners with a question that they can take away and reflect on and contemplate that will help them engage with some of what we've spoken about today?
Yeah. I guess it would be, what would you attempt to do if you knew that you would not fail? And I don't say if you knew you would succeed, because as part of the learning journey, right? There's sometimes, things, I don't want to say barriers, but right it's a sequence of events that help us with our learning. And so, it's not everything's going to happen all at once. And so that's just why I say not fail, because things not going the way we want them to doesn't mean that we failed, but it's just part of that learning process, right? So if you knew though that the end game was succeeding, right? What would you attempt to do? And open up to your imagination.
Genius question. Thank you so much. Well, thank
you so much for having this. It's been truly a delight.
Oh, me too. It's been so much fun. I've loved it. So let's remind people where to find you. engensolutions.com, ENGENSOLUTIONS.com. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And everyone watching and listening, please carry on watching, carry on listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. It really helps if you give a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, a review, and share with your friends. If you're looking for transformational coaching or an intensive transformational weekend workshop experience, I can help with that. You can actually help the show by making a donation. Until next time, take care.